It's particularly difficult when you're in an industry that I would call a vice industry, right? Which is when you are giving people harmful things that they want, cigarettes, alcohol. And I would say for certain categories of people, social media.
You're listening to the Startup Podcast. This is a Reacts episode.
Hi, I'm Yaniv Bernstein.
And I'm Chris Saad.
We have a jam-packed episode for you today, full of the latest news in tech, industry, society, and politics. The first thing we wanted to talk about is Meta's antitrust trial. There's a whistleblower who is sharing some shocking allegations. Stay tuned to find out what they are. Then we're going to talk about NVIDIA's big bet on the US AI industry, their $500 billion commitment. Is this a big bet, or is it just another example of big companies taking the knee, kissing Trump's ring? Next, we're going to talk about Chris's favorite podcast, The All In Show. Just kidding, Chris. But, for a change, they actually had some really heavy-hitting experts on the show, and what that revealed about the state of the world today is fascinating, and we'll break that down for you. And finally, we're going to talk about ChatGPT, or rather, OpenAI's GPT-4.1, their coding-specific model. What does that mean for software engineers? And OpenAI's deep memory for GPT and why this is the next stage in lock-in. All that on the show right after the break. Stay tuned. Whether you're starting or scaling your company's security program, demonstrating top-notch security practices and establishing trust is more important than ever. Vanta automates compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. And it gets even better. Just for TSP listeners, you can get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.
All right. So our first topic today is about the Meta antitrust trial that is getting started. So let's talk about a little bit of context here. Last week, former Meta executive Sarah Wynne Williams delivered an explosive testimony before the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee, accusing Meta of prioritizing profits over safety for its youngest users. She alleged that Meta exploited the emotional vulnerabilities of teens aged 13 to 17 using behavioral cues such as deleting selfies to target them with ads for beauty and weight loss. She said that Meta executives, including Zuckerberg, were aware of these things and the psychological harm they were causing and chose not to veto these measures. She also accused them of compromising U.S. national security by collaborating with the Chinese Communist Party. According to her testimony, they developed censorship tools for China and shared AI technologies that may have bolstered China's military capabilities. Specifically, she was saying that the party asked for this kind of editorial rights over posts that hit 10,000 views, and there was this kind of master editor, and that the party could deprioritize or de-emphasize posts. They could shut the whole system down on sensitive days like Tiananmen Square and so on. And, the accusations are money over good judgment, over national security, over children's safety. So yeah, this is all kicked off in earnest, and it's a big deal. Meta stock is hurting bad, while some of the Mag 7 have rebounded a little, not rebounded, but are inching their way up. Meta feels like it's sort of going nowhere or even going down. What do you make of this, Yaniv?
A couple of things. First of all, I'm not quite sure what this has to do with antitrust. Like basically all of those allegations. And by the way, Sarah Wynne Williams is also the person who very recently published a memoir of her time at Facebook called Careless People, a cautionary tale of power, greed, and lost idealism. So, I think that's probably why she was brought up there. And, so yes, I don't know what it has to do with antitrust. What it makes it clear is that Facebook and Meta are a bunch of scumbags, which, personally, I feel I already knew. I know, Chris, you and I have crossed swords on that one a little bit in the past, but I think it's a company that is not particularly ethical and that was very, very focused on growth at all costs and saw anything that was an impediment to growth as something to be dealt with, as opposed to, something that maybe there's a time where you sort of stop and consider what your values are and what actually matters to do good in the world, and anything like that. It's just like, okay, how do we make the number go up and to the right? And, credit where it's due. On that metric, they're incredible, right? So all of these things, I would say, that all these allegations are, if you view it through a completely amoral lens, as simply business problems to be solved, they made good decisions and they went ahead and solved them. But that doesn't make it okay, right? It's really a moral argument more than anything else.
Yeah, so I saw a few seconds of testimony on this where she was talking about China and about their willingness to work with the Chinese government to create these censorship tools and so on. On that front, at least, I haven't heard testimony about the kids stuff. And so to the degree that that's true, it's disgusting and unforgivable and inexcusable. On the China one, I was less convinced. There's a little bit of like, company trying to grow, company conforming to local laws. Next up, water is wet. Breaking news at 7. I often am skeptical about when you put things in kind of with dramatic music and put them in a hearing, they always seem like they're bad by default. The Chinese Communist Party is bad and their surveillance apparatus is bad. Having to exist in China following those rules is bad. But if you want to exist in China, you've got to play by those rules. And it's completely unsurprising that they would be trying to play by those rules to exist in China. It just seems like one of those things of like, no shit. I think where it becomes more explicitly like they broke the law is when they testified in front of Congress that they were not doing those things, that they were not in conversations with China and they were not in conversations about moderating speech and implementing, quote unquote, backdoors for those kind of tools for the Communist Party. They were not putting US data in China sovereignty, which it remains to be seen if that was actually happening. There's a striation here, right? Like harming kids, knowing you're harming kids, targeting them with beauty ads when they're deleting selfies. Bad, disgusting. They should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Building moderation tools and state control tools to exist in China, no shit. That's what they do. That's how you exist in China. And if anyone who's in China is playing that game, lying to Congress or leaking US citizen data to China, bad, go to jail. So, it's just, pick your battle, pick your specific thing and just, we just got to be nuanced about that. When I've defended Facebook in the past and Mark Zuckerberg in the past, I've defended it from the point of view of, you can see how Elon Musk behaves, putting his thumb on the scales, promoting right-wing content, deleting all kind of moderations and community standards, being basically a disgusting pig. And you can see what Mark Zuckerberg's done, which is to be neutral, to try to have surgical fact-checking from third parties, to not overreact for the left, where you actually trying to censor people on the left and although in some cases they took stuff down now that it's been revealed, or promoting disgusting stuff on the right. And so by that standard, I think he's been a much more nuanced and careful steward of the Facebook community. And I think raking them over the coals for that and not Fox News or the lack of action by Congress, I think is double standards and red herrings and is a problematic. But this kind of stuff, creating harm for kids or, putting US citizen data at risk is, it's a different class of thing and it's disgusting.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's, what sort of reminds me of cigarette companies and that sort of thing. I don't know what the solution is, right? Because, capitalists gonna capitalist. That's sort of the point of a company, right? Their KPI is to make money, no matter what, right? They're very good at doing that. And Facebook is generationally good at doing that. And then it is the role of government in a well-regulated capitalist system to make sure that these companies cannot do harm. But I think it's particularly difficult when you're in an industry that I would call a vice industry, right? Which is when you are giving people harmful things that they want, cigarettes, alcohol. And I would say for certain categories of people, social media that is not good for them, but that they're very engaged with and that they keep coming back for. And so, I think what happened is Facebook found themselves in the vice industry accidentally. I don't think they meant to. They're just, teenage girls and, whatever other vulnerable cohorts discovered Facebook. And, the algorithms and just the sheer grinding logic of capitalism moved things in the direction of you increase engagement by increasing the sort of harmful, addictive behavior on the platform. And the question is, yes, what's the role of government? And I think, Chris, you're right to pinpoint that the real failure of Facebook is when they started to lie about it, right? That's the unforgivable bit. In the same way that cigarette companies, where did they lose any moral standing? Is when they started to lie and actively pursue disinformation campaigns about the harms of cigarettes. Until then, they were just doing what any company would do. But if you start to lie about the harm that you cause, then that is a very, very dark path.
The distinction I've always drawn is, cigarettes have zero social good, right? They're literally just.
I think a lot of smokers would disagree with you on that.
They're just wrong. They're cancer sticks. They harm them. They harm people, and they harm the people smoking, and they harm the people around them. There is no social good to smoking. Period. Full stop. I mean, you can argue with me about that in the comments. I don't care. And the difference with Facebook is Facebook has also been instrumental in organizing social movements, in Black Lives Matter and Me Too, and enabling people to connect and to find kinship and to sell their secondhand goods and whatever. And there is this duality to social media, and people who just kind of decry social media is bad, and people opinions I don't like should be stricken from the record, and this is a kind of a two-dimensional view of the world. But when you start hiding harms, minimizing control against those harms, conspiring with foreign governments in a way that may leak, sensitive data from the Western world, these are crossing a line. And as I said, should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law.
We'll see what happens. It's just a tough situation in general, right? Because it's really something more for government. I think government in general has had a lot of difficulty dealing with the fast-moving, complex nature of technology threats to society. Without putting too fine a point on it, I think that the current regime in the US is uniquely unsuited to dealing with this.
This is the other point I've always made when I've been the defender of Facebook is the point you made earlier, which is a well-functioning government is supposed to regulate and monitor and pass laws about what is disinformation, misinformation, about what rises to the level of hate crime and all this. So it's up to the Congress to define many of these guardrails for society, and for these companies to not take the role of social curator or arbiter. Now, it sounds like I'm making the Elon Musk argument, and I'm not, because he's an absolutist and he has no taste, and he's also a hypocrite. I'm just saying there's more for the government to have done here. I always wince when I see them, raking Mark Zuckerberg over the coals, and also making fun of his affect. People making fun of him, he's robotic and he's not even human. And I just think all of this is just crossing the line when there's no self-awareness on that stuff. But
okay.
All right, well, let's talk about the second topic then. NVIDIA announcing plans to invest $500 billion over the next 4 years to build AI supercomputers entirely within the United States. This initiative includes constructing manufacturing facilities in Texas in partnership with Foxconn in Houston, and Wistron in Dallas, with mass production expected to commence in 12 to 15 months. Additionally, NVIDIA's Blackwell AI chips have already begun production at Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company's plant in TSMC in Phoenix, Arizona. CEO Jensen Huang emphasizes that this domestic expansion aims to meet the growing demand for AI infrastructure, strengthen supply chain resilience, and bolster the US's position in the global tech landscape. And obviously this aligns with Trump's push for increased domestic manufacturing, especially in this crazy trade war that he started with China. What do you make of this? Is this brilliant? Is this brilliant result of Trump's tariff strategy, or is this a more bullshit hot air?
Well, you know what I'm going to say. I mean, there's a few things that's I'm so sick of discussing this guy, Trump. Honestly, this looks like an NVIDIA story. It's just another Trump story, right? Trump loves it when companies basically make him look good. And so this is classic totalitarian stuff where these companies line up to make announcements that Trump can make hay out of and then take credit for it. So I'll note a few things here, right? The biggest of which is that Joe Biden, remember that guy, he actually passed something called the CHIPS Act, which was an act of Congress that basically funded the development of a domestic semiconductor industry in the United States. And so when I look at something like this, when I look at, some of the announcements from OpenAI a while ago about building big data centers, but this one in particular, if the announcement is being made in April, 3 months into Donald Trump's term, and, the factory is already nearly built, guess what? it did not start on January 20th. And in fact, this had a lot of funding from an act of the previous Democratic president, which I believe at the moment Donald Trump is trying to eliminate the CHIPS Act. So, if anything, he is making it harder to do this sort of thing. But sure, try to call it a win. And of course, I guess there's this element in which you'd say maybe the tariffs are working in a very narrow sense, except that now semiconductors have an exemption, right? But sure, if you have a lot of tariffs and you have a very big market, you are encouraging a certain amount of manufacturing in the United States. But the final point I'd make on this, because like I said, this is a Trump story. The creation of semiconductors requires a lot of very specialized materials that are often known as rare earth minerals. And the supply chain, the mining and refinement of rare earth minerals, there's a country that has a near monopoly on that. And Chris, can you guess what country that is?
Australia?
No, it's a country called China.
In
right?
China?
And so
Okay.
China has a near monopoly on the export, mining, refinement, and export of rare earth minerals. Without them, you're not making any semiconductors, no advanced semiconductors. And China just last week, as a result of the Trump-initiated trade war, has announced new export restrictions on rare earth minerals. And if the US continues down its path of antagonizing China in trade, you can bet that these facilities are not going to have the raw materials they need to produce these advanced chips in the United States. So to me, this is just it makes me sick, really. Like it's just part of the sort of downward spiral of the US. And to see this as a positive announcement of like an investment, to me, it's just a load of nonsense.
Wait, I don't understand. If you're saying that building manufacturing bases in the US will take years and years to execute, and you're saying that the world is somehow interdependent and there is global supply chains that can't be unwound. I don't really understand what you're saying. I thought we could just throw up tariffs on everything and it'd be fine. I'm a bit confused.
Yeah, I know. I'm a crazy radical far left globalist. Me and George Soros, we go to our local, Elders of Zion meeting and we plot how to take down the white man. That's what we're doing.
I've tried for many years to make thoughtful, eloquent, articulate, considered arguments to my friendly neighborhood MAGA apologists. And, if you notice the last episode, I've arrived at, this is dumb, they're dumb, and I'm now arriving at, if you believe them, you're dumb. I mean, and I don't have any words left to mince. You talked about the tariffs might, in some narrow sense, encourage manufacturing back in the, no, they won't. Because nobody for a second believes that these tariffs are just going to be sustained, that they're going to be implemented properly, that they're going to survive beyond, the dead downturn and the midterms and the next administration. No one believes that. And manufacturing takes years to occur. And not to mention the interdependence, rare earth minerals. There's no people in the US willing to do these jobs. So they're going to be automated. So it doesn't affect jobs at all. It just, the whole thing is stupid. I found myself in the last week arguing with people in comments, and one of them said something along the lines of, we were having what I thought was trying to be a constructive conversation. And he said something about, well, the LGBTQ plus agenda, blah, 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 and my kids, and I don't care if he burns the whole economy down. And this came out of nowhere. And I was like, oh, okay. You're a moron. And there's nothing left to say. So, and this is where I find myself with most of these conversations lately. If you're still holding on hope after the disappearing of innocence, after the completely incompetent tariff rollouts, after the clear shakedowns and blackmails and the defunding of NATO, which apparently is about to happen, you're just a moron. There's nothing left to say about it.
Well, I mean, moron is kind of kind in a way. I read this powerful quote, which is, if you ever wondered what you would be doing if you were a regular German citizen in the 1930s, it's whatever you're doing right now. It's not like fascism just sort of wakes up one day and announces congratulations, you're now living in a fascist state. It happens in fast slices, increments where, all the norms are taken away, all the institutions are taken away. There's a book that was written after World War II, after the Holocaust, called The Banality of Evil, right? And that's what it talks about. It's like evil, it's not like some person in devil horns who has no redeeming characteristics who, eats children for breakfast. No, it's regular people who let themselves get swept up in this wave. And that's what's happening.
The problem is, that when you reach for Hitler, people assume you're exaggerating. And they assume that, oh my God, every comment thread becomes about Hitler. And oh, this is just, silly discussion and it's now hyperbole and blah, blah, blah. And the problem is it's not Hitler until it's Hitler. And the guy is literally ignoring the Supreme Court right now. Right now.
Yeah.
Okay? He's holding a press conference with his friend, dictator, smirking and smiling and sniveling, while the Steve Millers of the world are like, this guy, he's literally an incel, on the world stage, mincing words about what the Supreme Court demanded that they do. This is not a false alarm. What's the word? This is not a...
There's not a drill.
Not a drill. Thank you. There's not a drill. He is testing the limits of executive power. He is ignoring the Supreme Court. He is sending immigrants to basically to terrorist concentration camps. And he has, in a recent interview, was asked, what about American citizens? And he said, why not? If they're the worst of the worst, why not? It's not a concentration camp with ovens, and it's not trains, and so we're not allowed to call it what it is. It has to be exactly the same as before.
History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. So yes, it's not going to be the same. And hopefully the outcome will be a lot less bad. But I also think understanding what happened in Germany is really instructive, because I think people just see a cliche, right? The Nazi Party came into power in 1932. They did not actually start a war until 1939. They did not start building death camps until 1941 or 42. Before that, they had concentration camps, which were not death camps. They were about detaining undesirables, and the conditions there were very bad, but they were not there to exterminate people. And so, these things happen. Even in Nazi Germany, it didn't happen all at once. It happened step by step by step by step by step over a decade. And we are 3 months into this presidency, and when you see the speed with which things are moving, and yes, absolutely, concentration camps are happening, you'd be a fool not to see historical parallels.
Here's another signal for you. He's in the Oval Office with his dictator friend, taking a press conference, being asked about this by CNN, why are you not going to get this guy brought back to the US? He literally muses out loud, why do I have to answer questions about this? I don't like these questions. You should stop asking me questions like this. And the next question guy was like, oh my God, we love you so much, and you've got the NVIDIA deal, and that's so fantastic. It wasn't a question. It was sucking up to dear leader. He literally, you can see him in real time, Yonev, the seed being planted. I don't need to answer these questions. I don't need to answer to the Supreme Court, and I don't need to answer to this journalist. And so it's happening every time.
I think it's fair to say we agree.
Yeah.
Shall we move on?
Shall we move on? So the next story we wanted to talk about was...
It's always hard to transition from the descent to fascism.
This tech podcast has just become a Trump venting session for everybody.
I hope you feel better. Over 7,000 global companies like Atlassian, Dovetail, FlowHealth, and Quora all use Vanta to manage risk and prove security in real time. Why aren't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.
Before we talk about ChatGPT, let's continue the conversation just a little bit on All In, and before we switch to ChatGPT 4.1 and some of the new AI models. Sorry, guys, if you hate the politics, we're just going to talk about that for a little bit longer. So, Yonev, I know you hate watching the All In podcast. I think you refuse to do it. I watch it out of morbid curiosity and fascination. I think it's very revealing to see how these billionaires are rationalizing and justifying what the Trump administration is doing. For the first time, they had two people on the show who were articulate and educated and authoritative to cut down their bullshit narratives. They had both David Sachs on the show for the full show as a member of the Trump administration and the ultimate apologist from the tech community, and they had Larry Summers and Ezra Klein on the show from the liberal and progressive side of the world. And they had actually what I think was a fairly good moderator in Jason Calacanis. They had Chamath on the show as well. And Chamath and David were like full-on apologists for the Trump and And Ezra and Larry, of course, were making the point there's an authoritarian and incompetent regime. I thought it was one of the most interesting conversations that I've seen on this topic, period, full stop. Larry Summers, who was the former Treasury Secretary, I believe, talking about the just kind of the ridiculous nature of using tariffs for any outcome, much less the outcomes that have been stated. Ezra Klein talking about this beautiful analogy of how the Iraq war was an unwinnable war because it was actually 5 or 7 different wars. Everyone in the coalition and the political coalitions and the country coalition wanted something different from it. They thought they were fighting a different war. And so it was unwinnable because everybody had different goals. And what Ezra was saying was, hey, Chamath and David, what you guys are saying and all of Trump's surrogates are saying are there's like 5 different narratives here. It's about reindustrializing the American base. It's about getting better trade deals. It's about rebalancing trade deficits. It's about, punishing countries. It's about this and it's about that. He made this beautiful point about this is 5 or 7 different narratives and none of them line up and none of them work. And David Sachs is, doing his typical, this is the way you got to get stuff done. You got to smash heads and you got to, move fast and break things. And, we come from Silicon Valley and we're disruptors. And Ezra had this really beautiful comeback of like, yeah, I'd really love for, things to get done. I agree with you. More things need to get done in government. The problem is the things getting done are fucking dumb. I want good things getting done. These guys are doing dumb things. And so, no, I don't think it's good getting dumb things done. I'm sorry. And, all David Sachs could do was look at the camera with his shit-eating grin because he had no answer for that. Just none. And so it was really quite incredible watching Larry Summers and Ezra Klein school Chamath and David on their own show. It was really, guys, I really encourage you all to watch it because it showed the limits of their intellectual dishonesty when confronted with people who know what they're talking about and know, especially Ezra knows how to make an incredible argument, and Larry was, actually in the role and extremely authoritative. I think it was really just a fantastic conversation. And then the last point I'll make about this, and I'd love to get your feedback on it, I saw Chamath talk about, one of the things he said is just beautiful takedown by Ezra. He's like, what you don't understand, Ezra, and what you don't understand, Larry, is when the Biden administration was in and I was doing all of this incredible stuff around energy production and they wouldn't even take my call and they wouldn't even listen to me about what we needed. And now what's happening is I had a top business leader in another country calling me on behalf of the country's leader, asking what they can do to make, give Trump what he wants so that they can bend over backwards to meet Trump's demands. And this administration, they listen to me and they're getting all of these concessions from all of these countries. And Larry and Ezra between them said some version of, yeah, they take your call because it's corrupt and nepotism and like insider trading. And what you don't know, Chamath, is they're calling you for a short-term reprieve to figure out how to deal with this psychopath. But what you're not getting is the other 5 calls they're making to other countries to figure out the long-term way of routing around the United States. And Chamath just had no fucking answer for that.
He said the quiet part out loud, really, didn't he?
Right, exactly. And that connected something to Bill Maher as that happened this week as well. Bill Maher was like, ostensibly a liberal champion, although he's become progressively crazy. He's like, I was invited to have dinner with Trump, and guess what? The crazy person that tweets crazy stuff, he wasn't there. He was reasonable and he was thoughtful and he laughed at my jokes and I was making fun of him, and he was completely reasonable and rational and I don't know why he's not like that in public. I think he just plays a crazy person in public. And both of these guys,
doesn't that make it worse?
But both of these guys, what they're not understanding is, Trump will listen to rich, influential media personalities because that's who Trump respects. And it's corruption in its finest. It's not a rules-based system. It's a relationship-based system. That's called corruption. And what he doesn't respect and has no empathy for is people who are weak, who are vulnerable, who need help, who need consistency, who don't know how to call the White House. And these people have no goddamn self-awareness. None.
Yeah.
They're so smug the way they talk. They intellectualize and rationalize all of the corruption. And they're just, as I keep saying lately, the last 2 episodes, they're just fucking dumb. I have nothing more articulate or thoughtful to say about it anymore.
They're not dumb, though. I think, this is just I'm going to keep my response short because it's just the same thing as I would have said, as I said to the previous topic, which is if you wonder what you would have been doing in Germany in the early 1930s, it's whatever you're doing right now. They're not dumb. They are human, and they are selfish, and they are greedy, and they are vain, and they kind of like what's happening because for them it's a good thing. Right? And it's flattering. Chamath, it's great. It must feel great to get calls from world leaders. Genuinely. I've got an ego to be important, to feel important, right? That feels good.
When I say they're dumb, it's the inability to look past the emotional gratification for some of the people in the Facebook
that's
comments.
Not dumb. That is lacking in self-awareness. That I would certainly agree with. Yeah.
We can use all sorts of eloquent language. You're cheering on the end of democracy in a rules-based system because you feel good. We can use all sorts of beautiful psychological.
That'll probably make you rich.
Yeah, but it's like global warming. You're trading the economy for the climate. Here you're trading a safe democratic world order for you feeling good and your bank account growing. That is dumb. There doesn't need any more clever words than that.
Yeah, but I think it's worth understanding the motivations, right? It's not just like, hoop derp, I'm stupid, right? It is all of these human weaknesses, right? That are culminating in this, right? And fear. And, there's another one, which is, I listened to a podcast a little while about the psychology of being in a cult, right? And, it was about doomsday cults where, the leader says, on this date, on the 16th of April, the world will end. And then the 16th of April comes and goes, and the world doesn't end. Now, what would you think as a non-cult member would happen is that the cult would dissolve. They'd be like, oh, we were lied to. But no, what happens is they double down because there is this sort of psychological sunk cost fallacy. You've invested so much of your identity into this cult that the idea that the dear leader was wrong is an attack on the very core of your identity. So instead, you make excuses for them, right? You will accept whatever bullshit they tell you because you are so deeply, deeply in the cult. And I think, that psychology is fascinating and it is highly relevant to people who support Trump from, the sort of MAGA person on the street all the way through to someone like Sachs or Chamath, right? Which is that they've invested their identity in this guy. And so no matter what he does, no matter how stupid his shit is, they are psychologically driven to defend it and in fact to double down. And that's what's happening.
Yeah, Nev, it's clear you have much more patience and thoughtfulness
I've got no patience
to describe this than I have left. I'm sorry if I'm being reductive or whatever. You're right. All of that is right. And I'm so exhausted with it that the only word I've got left is it's dumb. And I just really, I don't want to deal with these people anymore or try to rationalize their behavior anymore. It just feels like they're trading their children's future. They're trading the future of civilization.
Let me suggest a new word for you, which is evil, right? I feel like we're too slow to use that word because it's sort of associated with some sort of cartoon villainy. But all of these actions you're talking about, the harm that they cause, it's evil. And so how about we stick with that one?
I think like the Hitler example, though, people just gloss over it because they assume it's hyperbole.
Yeah, but if not now, then when, right? Again, evil people aren't sitting there eating babies for breakfast. That's just a total caricature of what evil is. This is what's happening. This is how it happens. It's happening now.
Yep. You're right. It's evil.
All right. Now, for another one of our famous awkward segues where we talk about the death of Western civilization, then we talk about the latest tech news again. We just thought we'd round things off here with a brief discussion of a new model from OpenAI called ChatGPT 4.1. 4.1, I hear you say. Isn't the latest one 4.5? Why would they release a new model with a smaller number? Okay, so let me talk about this one in general, and then Chris, I think you've probably got a rant saved up for that. So ChatGPT 4.1 is a semi-specialized model that it is designed for coding tasks, right? So it's not actually available through ChatGPT. It's a GPT model. It's available through the GPT API. And the reason for that is because it is primarily designed for coding type tasks. And, one of the things that has been really interesting to watch and participate in, as a software engineer over the last few months is this dawning realization that writing code is probably one of the earliest areas where AI is really going to completely change how things are done. I'm not talking about vibe coding. I'm talking about completely changing how software gets built, though. And OpenAI have been runners up on this one, right? So I think Anthropic and Claude, for a long time, they've kind of saw that writing on the wall and they've invested in making their models the best for coding. And they are. And then more recently, Google with their Gemini 2.5 Pro release, depending on who you ask, it's as good or better than, or nearly as good at, and it's in the same ballpark as Claude 3.7. And so what you actually had was a two-horse race. Like anybody who's using a tool like Cursor or Windsurf, they will tell you the models that they use will either be Claude or Gemini or a combination of the two. And so OpenAI is actually kind of left out, which is an unusual place for them to be. And so they've been scrambling to catch up. And what I think we're seeing with GPT 4.1 is their attempt at saying, okay, we have lost a competitive position in what is actually one of the most short-term profound changes, impacts of LLMs. We need to get in there. And so they've released a model, GPT 4.1, that is specifically designed for coding. Now, the question is it actually as good as the other two? And actually that's still being shaken out. But that's clearly, this is, again, we've talked about competition being good, and how OpenAI spurred Google to actually wake up and use their expertise to build incredible models. Well, this is actually Anthropic and Google doing the same back to OpenAI, where they're like, oh, okay, we're behind. We're not used to this, and playing catch up, and hence GPT 4.1.
Yeah, and of course, this is weird because there's GPT 4.0, there's GPT 4.5, there's GPT-0.1, GPT-0.3. Just to talk about product management, product marketing for a second here for anyone listening and interested in that. This is a great example of when you have researchers or engineers or domain experts running the org, and you're shipping the org or you're shipping technical detail instead of shipping product. This is just really poor product marketing. They need to introduce a new naming convention, something like, GPT for coding, or GPT for reasoning, GPT for conversation. And they need to stop just relying on version numbers for everything. It's really, really very silly. And it's confusing. It's unnecessarily complicated. And I'm also waiting for the day that they fix their ChatGPT interface so that you just have to stop choosing. There's a model selector there, which is completely insane. There should be some routing engine over the top that chooses the right model for the prompt. And all of that should be made invisible to the consumer grade end user. I'm actually quite surprised that OpenAI's product marketing is so weak. It's a real missed opportunity, something they need to work on. Even if you think like Claude Sonnet 3.2, come up with a name. This is the coding. This is the model for coding. This is the model for images. This is the model for whatever. The best they've gotten to is like Sora and DALL-E. They've actually given those things actually distinct names. But yeah, they need to do better if they're going to compete for owning the vocabulary. But in any case, it's good that they've got competition. It's good that they're catching up, keeping up on the coding side. Yeah, I guess we'll see what happens next with their product naming conventions.
It's not yet clear that they are keeping up. To me, this looks like a semi-panicked response, right? Where they realize they'd fallen way behind. It's only been out for a day. Very early anecdotal data suggests that it's still not quite as good as the other two. But it's fascinating, and I think it just shows how quickly things move in AI, where you can be the unassailable leader one day and fallen way behind the next. And so we've got, to me, the fascinating thing about all this is, like I said, it's just the power of competition, and these guys are racing each other like crazy. And we've got at least a 3-horse race, and a bunch of other folks close behind, or at least keeping the top 3 honest. Which is pretty cool. And, things are changing really fast. And, like I said, if you are a software developer and you are not using these tools, I strongly encourage you to change that, because you are on the pathway to obsolescence, right? And when I say that, I don't think that software developers and software engineers are going to go anywhere, at least for the next few years, until we hit AGI and, ASI, and then everyone's job becomes obsolete. But for now, the job has completely changed, right? If you're not using these tools, it's like, I don't know what it's like. It's like being
Well, it's like plowing a field manually instead of with a machine, with a tractor.
Yeah, exactly
right.
Right. Exactly right. It's this incredible automation tool that the core part of your craft is now to learn how to use it well. It's still not that easy to use, but the power it has is insane, and it is growing very, very quickly. And so that's what I would say to folks.
Now, not being an engineer, the announcement they made recently that was much more interesting to me was their ability to use all previous chat threads as memory, as context for all future chat threads, which was a revelation for me. That was really, really cool. And when you talk about lock-in, you talk about flywheels, there is this subtle lock-in that's going to occur where you start to fall in love with, or at least have a relationship with, your primary meta agent or primary personal agent. And for me, there's little to no chance I'm switching off ChatGPT now. It knows everything about me. I understand its voice. I understand how it works, how to poke it and prod it, and it knows all of my prior conversations. And I can't tell you the number of times that's been priceless to me over the last week. And there are certain prompts you can ask it that are really interesting. So the demo prompt they gave you was like, hey, all my chats, write up a fun and catchy, description of who I am and what I do. And that's been fun. I posted that on my, my LinkedIn and whatever. But then you ask it such much more dark and serious questions. Like you can say, hey, let's role play as a CIA analyst. And I want you to figure out my psychology, my weaknesses, my psychological profile, how I can be manipulated. And it's it was incredible what it did for me. And then I sort of asked it, my wife asked it to do that about her, and we sort of compared notes, and, it was really, really fascinating and really interesting, and was actually quite helpful to understand how I think and what my blind spots are and all sorts of stuff. And so really, really interesting. I actually pasted that prompt also on my Facebook. If you guys want to go see, it's probably a public post on my Facebook wall. And so there's quite a multi-paragraph prompt to get it to act like a CIA agent really, really well. And I think this is a subtle, not so subtle form of lock-in, where and not only is it massively more utility, but the more you use it, the more you need to keep using it, and only it. And you want to have all your conversations in there, and it's just priceless.
All right, Chris. Well, a spicy episode. Thank you for sharing what you really think. How can people find you on the internet?
Well, you can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Instagram, on LinkedIn, and all the social media at Chris Sard. You can also find me on my site, chrissard.com, and my newsletter, chrissard.com/newsletter. How about you, Yonev?
I'm mostly on LinkedIn, trying to make it a less boring place, and yes, clapping back against trolls and evildoers with limited effect. But yes, I love getting connection requests from TSP listeners. So yeah, hit me up. Let me know you've come from the podcast, and I will accept your request. All right, Chris, have a good one.
All right, awesome. Catch you soon, man. Bye-bye.
Today's episode of the Startup Podcast was brought to you by Vanta. Vanta automates compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. Over 7,000 global companies already use Vanta. Why don't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.